Pre-season testing is fully over now, and we are just a few days away from the start of the 2023 F1 season in Bahrain. But the question is, what did we actually learn from testing? Because I think there's a lot of information that we can take from testing, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about just that. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to be ranking where I think each team is from 10th to first place in terms of constructors. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more F1 content. Now, let's get to the video. Let's get the first thing out of the way. We have learned that it seems like porpoising is going to be a thing of the past for all but one team as we head into the first race of the year. Thankfully though, it does not look like any of the heavy hitters are actually suffering from porpoising this year. Mercedes seems to have certainly fixed their issues, and Ferrari, which suffered heavily with it last year, seems to only really bounce over the bumps in the circuits, which is kinda normal for everyone. However, there was one team that was consistently bouncing up and down the circuits and just did not seem to be very comfy, and that was the Alpine team. The Alpine car did look pretty complex, and I'm sure that when they sort out all their issues, it will be a good car, but it certainly looked like a rough ride. The car did not seem happy at all on the circuit, and the team do still keep saying that they are confident that the car will work, and they're seemingly happy with their performance, but myself personally, I'm not convinced, and neither are some of the commentators, as they were saying plenty about how the car looked shocking out on track. Are they just massively sandbagging? We will have to just wait and see when the Bahrain Grand Prix gets underway. Now, I am going to get into each team, but before we do that, I just want to say that there is one other thing that we've learned, which is a massive positive from last year, and that is that the teams have almost certainly closed the gap from last year. Last year at the beginning of the season, there was a large gap of about 3 to 4 seconds between the Ferrari Red Bull to the Williams, which was of course the slowest car last year, but in testing this year it looks much closer, as the gap seems to be down to about just 2 to 2.5 seconds between the teams, which might still sound like a lot, but it is a massive improvement, and potentially it shows that yes, it seems the new rules with heavier wind tunnel and CFD restrictions on more successful teams is actually a positive thing, and it does seem to work. There is still a gulf between the midfield and the fastest teams, which is a bit of a shame, but that gulf is closing, and the battle in the midfield is going to be absolutely incredible in my opinion, and we might not actually have a backmarker team, and instead have the midfield teams, which just happens to have a bad weekend, be the team that happens to be at the back of the grid for that weekend. Who knows, but let's get into each team and what happened with them. Let's start with the team that finished last in the Constructors' Championship last year, and that was Williams. I thought going into testing that Williams would almost certainly be the slowest car and not really have a lot to show, but I must say I have been pleasantly surprised by the team and the car itself. It may not be the most advanced car on the grid, but it is a tidy race car, and it seems like they've made good use of the CFD and wind tunnel allowance that they have to create a car that, at least in the beginning of the year, could be really good in the hands of Alex Albon, be a decent midfield runner that could scrape points from time to time. Logan Sargent himself is certainly an improvement over Nicholas Latifi, and it seems like we could actually see two Williams cars fighting for points instead of just one of them at the beginning of the year. But I do think over the season, Williams are going to need to bring a lot of upgrades. But due to how their off-season went, I think it's going to be a little bit unlikely that we see that for Williams. But at least as of right now, they have a decent race car. Next up is AlphaTauri, and honestly, I forgot that AlphaTauri was 9th place in the Constructors from last year. And also, I almost forgot they were in this test. AlphaTauri's performances really went under the radar this week, and with reports coming out that Red Bull are potentially looking at selling the team, I really don't think we're in for a good season for AlphaTauri. That being said, it could just be that they were focusing on long runs, and we can see that by the fact that they definitely clocked up a lot of laps and went about their business in a silent way. The car is a nice looking car and has some interesting aspects around the floor area, but we never really got to see anything from them, at least as of right now. Who knows though where they could be for the season, but to be honest, I just don't have high hopes for them. Next up is Haas. In terms of teams that have maximised their development time, Haas turned up with a very tidy looking race car with a lot of developments from what they ended with 2022. With that being said, and given how Haas typically works, bringing only 1 or 2 upgrades a season, we really should have expected them to have a big upgrade for this season. Haas, similar to AlphaTauri, went kind of under the radar in terms of testing. They just kept pounding round and round the circuit, doing lap after lap, and for me, this is a positive for Haas, because typically, Haas struggles with getting mileage on the board. I assume this is due to how small the team is, because of course they are the smallest team in the field. But this year, they were able to keep going around doing long runs, so for Haas, this was a successful test. Will they be in a position to fight for points? Well, I think they have a chance of at least getting one car into the points in the first race, because of course the first race can always involve a bit of chaos. They just though need to make sure that they keep their nose clean early on in the season. In P7 is a team that almost certainly will not finish in P7 this time next year, and that is Aston Martin. And for Aston Martin, they have had the best possible pre-season test imaginable. The car looks fantastic out on track. Whether it was long runs or short runs, the car just looked dialed into the circuits and hooked up. All 3 days of testing was great for Aston Martin. The team ended 2022 on a high note, and I think they really started to show some good performances from Austin to the end of the season, and they've carried that momentum forward into 2023. Fernando Alonso looked like a driver who is certain to get into Q3 in Bahrain. And if things go right for Alonso, he could find himself on the podium a couple of races this season. Maybe even as early as Bahrain. But yeah, Aston Martin looked strong, but there was some reliability gremlins creeping into the car from time to time. On day 1, the Aston broke down, bringing out the first red flag of the session. And on day 3, later on in the day, there was a few nagging issues, which will need to be ironed out for the first race. But overall, they have a fantastic race car, and I really do think they have potential to finish 4th in the Constructors this year. Alfa Romeo had an interesting test. Their car definitely looked much improved from last year, but we need to remember that they started the year off very well last year, and then it petered out as the season went on. During this test, the car looked very good. They even managed to go fastest on day 2 with Zhou Guanyu topping the timing sheets, but does this mean that they're going to be mixing it with the Ferraris and Red Bulls? Nah, not really. They proved that they certainly do have some speed in the car when they opened up on short runs, but there is a big issue with Alfa Romeo. They have had a lot of mechanical problems, which has really plagued the car and held them back in certain areas. Valtteri Bottas had a gearbox failure on day 3, which brought his running to an end for a few hours. And also, even though Zhou Guanyu went fastest on day 2, he did break down very quickly after that. Because of this, I do think Alfa Romeo will suffer with some reliability issues, and that is still an area that they need to fix early on in this season. But I do believe that they will. It's just a matter of time, as we don't want them to be on the side of the track like we saw a little bit too often last season. Now, they were the teams that had a good test, but now we go from good to downright terrible. McLaren had a shocking Bahrain's preseason test. There was a lot of rumours coming from their launch that they knew they would be slightly behind the curve in terms of pace and performance, but that test was shocking. Not only was the car slow, but they were all over the place. They suffered from issues early on, keeping them in the garage for a while. They were really struggling with the tyre deflectors on the front of their car. They believe they will have a fix for this in time for the Bahrain Grand Prix, but it was not a good start. As the test went on, this trend just seemed to continue. McLaren probably spent the most amount of time out of any team in the garage fixing nagging reliability issues, and this meant that they really could not put their car through its paces on track. When they did get the car on track, it just seemed slow and lacking a lot of pace. They ended day 3 with both Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri in the bottom half of the field, with neither driver managing to get their car into the top 10, despite the fact that there were only 17 drivers on day 3 of testing. McLaren need to find performance and find it very quickly, but there is of course one saving grace. McLaren were terrible in Bahrain last year and went on to have a good season. Could we see more of the same? Only time will tell, and for them I really hope that is the case, but I'm not too sure about that. Next up is the Alpine team. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it is hard to judge where Alpine are. The car looks to be the most stiff out of any car, and that meant that they really struggled over the bumps, and also looked like they were struggling to get power down onto the track. This tells me that they are still chasing setup and don't really know where their car will be when it comes to the Grand Prix. Either that or Alpine was doing the ultimate sandbagging. Maybe when we get to circuits with a smoother surface they will be okay, but for one big positive for the Alpine, they were the second fastest car in the speed trap, hitting 325 kilometers per hour, which tells me that yes, they may be struggling for grip and struggling in the corners, but they do have a slippery car in a straight line, which could be handy at some of the circuits this season. Now we get to the top 3 teams from 2022, and well, it seems like the bad news keeps rolling on, as we start with Mercedes. Mercedes had a mixed bag test in my opinion. It definitely seemed like they have fallen away, at least at the beginning of the year, from the top 2 teams. In Lewis Hamilton's hands, the car just did not look planted out on track. At the beginning, I thought it was him driving the car on purpose over the edge in order to see what the car was like when he pushed the car over its limits. But even on day 3, the car just did not look hooked up for him. He ran wide a lot and just did not have the right balance. I hope it's something they can fix, but they did not have the best of tests. George Russell, on the other hand, did have a better test, but honestly it was not fantastic either. They should be ahead of Aston Martin and in 3rd place in terms of performance, but they are once again playing catch-up to the top 2. They also struggle with reliability, but if there's one team that can analyze the data and fix any reliability issues, it is Mercedes. Sadly though, they do have work to do before the first race. Ferrari's test was pretty decent in terms of performance. They are definitely clear of the Mercedes team, but it's hard to say if they are close to Red Bull. It doesn't really look like they will be close to Red Bull, and they could be on the back foot a little bit in terms of performance. But Ferrari managed to clock up some decent running, and during the daytime sessions it seemed like they were pretty handy and ahead of Red Bull at times. However, they still have a lot of work to do, as it seems like their tyre wear could be on the high side, which is not really ideal for them because, well, their main competition looks to have it all very well under control. That being said, Ferrari seem to have fixed the drag issues that in a way plagued them last year. They were able to top the speed traps, which is a positive, as it means we could be able to see them take the fight to Red Bull a little bit more often, should they be in a position to be close enough to them in the race. And speaking of Red Bull, finally we come to the Red Bull team, and well, what we learned from testing is that Red Bull seem to have a brilliant race car, and they are looking pretty comfy for the start of the year. Testing went near on perfect for the team. As soon as they got out on track, it looked like they had the car in the sweet spot. Obviously they didn't, but the car did look to be in a great position, and they were able to extract a decent amount of performance early on. Both Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez were able to rake in a lot of laps, and like I said in my testing preview and predictions, they would do just that, so they can see if the Honda power unit is up to the task, and well, it definitely will be. Red Bull looked like the team to beat at the start of the season, but the question is do you think they can be stopped? Let me know in the comments down below as we edge closer to the first Grand Prix. So with that in mind then, what is going to be the running order for Bahrain? Well, I think it's going to be very, very close between a lot of teams, especially in that midfield, and it's going to be really hard to say who will be where. But from 10th to 1st, here's who I think is going to be the running order. In 10th place, it's going to be the AlphaTauri team. I just think they're going to have a very difficult year this year, and I think Bahrain is not going to go very well for them. In 9th place will be the McLaren team. McLaren just doesn't seem ready for the season, and I think they're going to really struggle in Bahrain, and probably at the first couple of races of the season. In 8th place will be the Williams team. In 7th place will be Alpine. In 6th place, Haas. In 5th place will be Alfa Romeo. And then in 4th place, I've gone for Aston Martin. I really do think Aston Martin is going to have a brilliant race car for Bahrain, and I can see them doing very, very well. In 3rd place is going to be the Mercedes. 2nd place Ferrari, which means of course the fastest car in Bahrain is probably going to be the Red Bull car. But that is what I think. Like I said before, let me know down in the comments, who do you think is going to be the fastest car in Bahrain, and who impressed you the most? given who improved the most, who's maybe taken the biggest step back. Let me know down in the comments. I look forward to reading and responding to your comments down below. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.